let's record. Right, now we're being recorded. Okay. So last time we got in chapter 4, we had the scenario that, if you recall, the people had gone into battle with the Philistines and had lost 4,000 men in a battle that they lost. And then they went back and said, I wonder why we lost. Perhaps it's because we didn't have the Aaron Habrit. So they took the Aaron Habrit and they then came back and had another go. And in fact, they got even more routed and they lost 30,000 men. And we had a discussion last time, if you remember, we brought the Rashi in Dvarim, which suggested that they actually took the wrong ark. And I played you a little clip from Raiders of the Lost Ark. There you have the situation where the Germans find the ark and it's not the right one. So this was a situation here where they took the wrong ark. Remember, there were two arks. There was the ark that Moshe made, which was made of wood, and in that went the broken luchot. And then there was the golden ark with the cheruvim, the cherubs on the top, and that's the one they took, and that should have stayed in the Kodesh Kodashim. So we ended last time with a summary of all the reasons why our group thought that they'd lost the battle. And we came up with a few reasons, which was they never asked God in the first place whether they should go out to battle. They took the wrong ark. They didn't go to the Urim V'Tumim. And all of those things were possibilities. But then we had another idea that perhaps there was something underlying this. And that's where we ended. And the last thing that we said was that this time we would look at perhaps the more deeper underlying reasons why the battle against the Philistine failed. And in order to do that, I want to finish off the chapter and look carefully, very carefully at the wording in the chapter to help us understand what was the mindset of the people and of Eli himself and his family. So we are in chapter 4. Let me see if I can find it and share it with you exactly where we're up to. Okay, let's share the screen. Okay, can you see the screen? Yeah, okay, right. So let's just go from we got to verse 11, but let's go back to verse 10. And I'm going to ask Leon to read from verse 10 to verse 18 inclusive. And I want you to all look very carefully and listen very carefully to the wording and the order in which these things say. So, Leon, if you would just start from verse 10 through to verse 18, please.
So the Philistines fought. Israel was smitten, and they ran, every man to his tents. The blow was very great. 30,000 foot soldiers fell from Israel. The ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. A Benjaminite man ran from the battlefront and came to Shiloh that day, his clothing ripped and dirt upon his head. When he came, Eli was seated in a chair next to the road, looking out, for his heart was fearful about the ark of God. The man arrived to inform the city, and the entire city cried out. Eli heard the sound of the outcry and said, "What is the commotion of this multitude?" And the man hastened. He came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old. His eyes had become motionless, and he could not see. The man said to Eli, I am the one who came from the battlefront, and I ran from the battlefront today. Eli said, what is the report, my son? The bearer of the tidings answered him, saying, Israel ran from before the Philistines, and there was a great blow among the people. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, died. And the ark of God was taken. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off his chair, opposite the site of the city gate, breaking his neck, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years.
Wow, what a dramatic 8 psukim we've just read there. Eli, the old man, the Kohen Gadol, is sitting on a seat, and he gets informed by this messenger who's come from the battlefield about what's gone on. And what I want to look at carefully is the order in which he told the events to Eli and Eli's response. Now, bearing in mind that Eli has already been told by God that he's going to be punished for the activities of his sons and the fact that he didn't admonish them correctly. We've had that, we went through that in some detail. So it's not entirely a surprise that his sons are going to die. But let's have a look and see. Let's go and see verse 17 and look at the order in which the messenger speaks to Eli. So the first thing he says is Nas Yisrael. Nas Yisrael. Israel has run away. We use that word Nas. We say that word. Where has it gone? There it is. Nas Yisrael. We use that word when we take out the Sefer Torah. Vayihi ben Saaron, Vayom Moshe, Kum Hashem yifutzu yivecha, Vayanusu misanecha, Vayanusu misanecha. Those who hate you should run away. So Nas Yisrael. Here, the boot's on the other foot here. Israel run away from before the Plishtim. V'gam magefa gdola hayta ba'am. There's our word magefa. It seems to be following us around, this word, doesn't it? Plague, magefa, a plague. A great plague came upon the people. This is translated here. There was a great slaughter among the people. I think that's it's not a particularly accurate translation of the word magefa, but it does give us the indication of what went on. There was a huge slaughter because the figures there that we spoke about was 30,000 people who were killed. So it was a great slaughter. So Israel ran away. There was a great slaughter.
Says a massive blow to the people.
A massive blow, yeah, and that fits as well. And then he goes on to say, and also your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, perished. And finally, the ark of God was taken. Now, if we look at the order that this fellow has said these things, what strikes you? Anybody want to give us a thought about what strikes you about the order that these things are mentioned?
The ark was the least important, according to him.
According to the messenger?
Yep.
Why did you say that?
This is the last thing he mentions.
Okay. Anybody want to disagree with Michael? Leon, you're nodding.
Well, yes, I'm helped by the notes, of course, that he was a bit frightened, if you like, to give the really bad news. And he gave them perhaps the least important news first, and then the worst of all came last.
Yes, I think that's how I read it, and that's how some of the Mepharshim read it. Actually, the opposite of what Michael suggested. And I think if you think about if ever you've had to give bad news over to somebody, I remember when I was working as a junior doctor in the hospital, when somebody passed away, the nurses used to have to ring up the relatives, and they would never tell them on the phone that they'd passed away. They would say, we think that you ought to get here as soon as possible because he's taken a turn for the worse. Right? God forbid you ever get a phone call that says somebody's taken a turn for the worse, he's probably already gone. Because they never wanted to tell bad news on the phone. So they said, I think you should get here as soon as possible. He's taken a turn for the worse. And when they get there, you say, well, he's deteriorated further, and he's unfortunately he's passed away. And so when you're telling bad news to people, you don't just blurt it out. You sort of build up to it, if you like. And I think that this is what was going on here. This messenger here says, Israel fled before the Philistines. And if it had just stopped there, Eli might have thought, well, okay, they didn't win the battle, but at least they managed to escape. And then he says, and there was a great slaughter amongst the people. So Eli might think, oh, that's a terrible thing. So many of the Israelites have been killed, but maybe my two sons survived, because obviously we're all most concerned about our own family, aren't we? That's just human nature. And then he says, I'm sorry to tell you, but your two sons were also amongst those that perished. And so then Eli thinks, well, that's terrible, but maybe the ark of God survived. And then he says, no, the ark of God was taken as well. So it's building up from bad news to worse news to even worse news to the worst news that there could possibly be. And it seems here from that order that the worst news that could possibly be was that the ark of God was captured. And in fact, verse 18 proves our point. Leon.
As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off his chair.
Go on, carry on. Carry on.
Opposite the site of the city gate, breaking his neck, and he died. For the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years.
So he didn't fall off his chair when he heard that Israel had fled. And he didn't fall off his chair when he heard that there was a great slaughter. And he didn't even fall off his chair when he heard that his two sons had died. He fell off his chair when the ark of God was mentioned. So as far as Eli was concerned, the most serious and terrible event of this whole disaster was the capture of the ark of God. And therein, I suggest, is the problem, the underlying problem that I promised we would discuss this time. If you go back and have a listen to the recording of the last shiur, the last thing that I said before questions was that it's all very well, we may have discussed the immediate reasons why they lost the battle. They didn't ask God's permission. They didn't go to the Urim V'Tumim. They took the wrong ark. But if we don't understand the underlying concept of what had gone wrong, then we've missed the point. I suggested that this week we would discuss those underlying concepts. And I think that these two psukim really point out what the underlying problem was. Eli, who represents the Kohen, the Kahuna, he's the Kohen Gadol, He represents the leadership. He represents the people. He is more bothered about things, great and wonderful and holy things that they are, than he is about people. He falls off his chair when he hears that the Ark of God has been taken. There is a great danger in religion that religiosity, as opposed to religiousness, as being religious, religiosity can blind people to what is the most important thing. We are, human beings are made in the image of God. B'Tselem Elokim. We are made in the image of God. The Torah, which is represented by the Ark of God, is a book, a manual for human beings of how they should live their lives. We know this from the famous Medrash, at Matan Torah, where the angels said, "Hey, what are you giving this Torah to the people, Jewish people, for? They don't deserve it. They're only going to break it. They're only going to not keep it. They're not going to let it stay here in Shemayim with us angels." And as it were, God turns around to them and says to Moshe Rabbeinu, who says, "Okay, Moshe, how are you going to answer that?" And Moshe turns around to the angels and says, "Have you got a mother and father?" No. Well, how are you going to keep Kibbud Avva'im then? Are you ever jealous? Do you have feelings? Do you have emotions of jealousy? No. Well, then how is it possible that the 10th of the 10 commandments can apply to you? You shall not covet. You're an angel. It doesn't work. The Torah is meant for human beings. And the Torah is only, when I say only, I don't mean to minimize this, is only the conduit through which we human beings are to be elevated to a position of Kedusha, Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. That's what we're meant to be. We're meant to be a nation of priests and a holy nation which carries out the will of God. When you have a scenario where the leadership, and therefore, because it always starts at the top, and that's why the leadership is so important, when the leadership is more bothered about the capture of a thing, even a thing as holy as the ark, more bothered than that, than the slaughter of people and the death of his own 2 sons, then you have an underlying problem where the ark of God has become, as it were, and I'm not suggesting this literally, but as it were, an object itself of avodah zarah. And we see this, I'm afraid, in religiosity in modern days. I'll stick my head on the block and say, think about Meron. There was an avodah zarah going on in Meron. I'm not talking about whether Rashbi should be danced around his grave and all. I'm not talking about that. That's another issue. The fact that such a gathering should be itself an avodah zarah, because certain people in power said, this must go on. It's so important that it must go on. And all the rules of safety and of health and all of those things have to be put on one side, because this is so important. It's more important than anything else. This disaster that happened at Pisgat, was it Pisgat Zev, where the bleachers collapsed, was a similar sort of thing. Any of you who've been to Lubavitch headquarters in New York at 770? Yeah. You've been there, Johnny. I've also been there. There is no concern for health and safety because things, religious symbolism, whether it's a thing or an event, takes on the level of avodah zarah. And this is what I think. I mean, I'm willing to be shot down here, but my view here is that these two psukim, if you look carefully at them, shows us that Eli was more bothered by the ark of God being captured. Now, I'm not minimizing that. That's a disaster. But excuse me, it's not as much of a disaster as losing 34,000 foot soldiers, including his own two sons. And if, as it seems from verse 18 and also 17 because of the order, if Eli believes that the capture of the ark of God is a greater disaster than the slaughter of 34,000 soldiers, including his two sons, then his priorities are wrong and are screwed up. And that, in my view, is the situation that was on here, and that is perhaps the underlying reason why this disaster occurred, because priorities were wrong. Now, we've always said, our group has always said, that we're not just learning this Tanakh, or when we were doing the Parsha, just for ticking a box exercise. We've got to take something out of this. We've got to be looking at this and saying, this is what happened in history. We know anybody who doesn't learn from history is doomed to repeat the same mistakes again. It's as true today as it ever was. We have to look at this and say, are we, either as individuals or as a community or as a people or as a country, guilty of having our priorities wrong, and that things, either symbolism or religiosity or nationalism or whatever it is it gaining too much importance at the expense of what's really important, which is the people themselves? And I leave you all to consider that for yourselves. From my perspective, I see this as a serious issue. Now, when I was learning this with my Chavruta on Friday, and I suggested this, he said, "Yeah, okay, I can see that." He said, "But I could paint a different picture. I could paint a picture here that this will come to you in a sec, Johnny. I could paint a picture," he said, "that Eli is such a holy man that he has transcended everything, and the ark of God is even more important, because this generation might not be fitting to have the ark of God, but maybe the next generation will be." And I said, that exactly is the problem. That is the problem exactly that I'm talking about. Because if you believe that symbolism is an ism, whether it is communism or capitalism or socialism or religiosity-ism, no such word I know, Michael, don't get upset, is more important than the people themselves, then we know that history shows that this is what's happened. So that I think is an important feature of verses 17 and 18 that we can't escape. And we'll come to Johnny in just one sec. And after we've heard from Johnny, I want to go into verses 19 to 22, which tells us another interesting point about this idea. Yes, Johnny?
Well, you're a doctor, but it's possible a 98-year-old, after hearing all that, he just had a heart attack. He couldn't take any more.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why he fell off his chair. He died of a heart attack, not a broken neck. His neck did break, but he had a heart attack first. And he's 98, and the shock was just unbelievable for him.
Could be. I agree entirely. The point about verse 18 is, what was the thing that gave him the shock to give him the heart attack?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So
everything, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It was a combination of things. Yeah. But the pasuk is pointing out only one, and the order in which the messenger gives it, it's clear that the ark of God was the most important thing to these people. Yeah. And that's where I'm coming from. Any other comments on what I've said? Anybody want to disagree with me? Come on, somebody must disagree with me.
Not disagree, but
yes, go on, Ivor.
Not disagree, but what's interesting is that the messenger, he doesn't. we don't hear what he actually announced in the city. We don't know what he said there. This outcry, this tremendous shouting, which Eli heard, because apparently he saw Eli on the way. Eli was blind, he couldn't see him, but he went straight to the city. Maybe he was afraid to talk to Eli initially, in view of what had happened, but we're not told what they actually said to the city. Why was this hue and cry? Could well be mainly because of the 34,000 who fell.
It could be, that's true. We're not told that. What we are told, which I didn't point out to you, which is here, I just remembered, there's another clue, or it's not actually a clue, it's explicit about the things that Eli was worried about. Look at verse 13. Leon, verse 13, please.
When he came, Eli was seated in a chair next to the road, looking out, for his heart was fearful about the ark of God. The man arrived to inform the city, and the entire city cried out.
So what's Eli worried about? It doesn't say he's worried about the people or he's worried about his sons. He's worried about the ark of God. He's got a one-track mind, Eli. So only thing he's bothered about by the looks of it. And it's when he heard the ark of God had gone, he said, oh, I knew it. That's it. I'm finished. Heart attack, fell off his chair, broke his neck. End of Eli. Now, before we move on from Eli, I want to point out a beautiful literary closing of the circle. Something which I'm sure, well, maybe I shouldn't be sure. Maybe I'm being unfair to you. Okay, I'll see if I'm right or not. Does anybody notice a beautiful literary closing of a circle at the end of the story of Eli's life? I'll tell you now, I didn't. But when I read it, I thought, wow, that's really amazing. Okay, well, I shall show you. Did any of you think, when you read verse 13, read it again for us, Leon, please, verse 13.
When he came, Eli was seated in a chair next to the road, looking out.
Just stop there a sec. Why do we need to be told that Eli was seated on a chair? We need to be told that he's seated on a chair because
he fell off
verse
it later.
18. Yeah, he's got to fall off it, right? Now, it was when he met verse 18, he mentioned the ark of God. Eli fell off the chair backwards through the gates opening and his neck broke and he died. Why do we need to be told that detail? Why don't we get told, like Johnny said, he heard the ark of God, he had a heart attack, he died. What difference does it make to us whether he fell off his chair and broke his neck, whether he had a heart attack? Who cares? He heard the news, it was a terrible shock, and he died. Why are we told this detail about him sitting on a chair, falling off the chair, breaking his neck, and all that performance? What does it add? Any offers? Okay, may I invite you to turn back to chapter 1, verse 9, and I will put it on the screen for you. Okay, can you see chapter 1 now on my screen? Yeah. Okay, chapter 1, verse 9 is the first time we encounter Eli. The first 8 psukim, you'll remember, is all about the family of Hannah, Elkanah, Penina, Hannah, the fact that they would go up to the temple and Hannah was upset, etc. We don't encounter Eli until verse 9. And let's see what we see when we first encounter Eli. Leon, please.
Hannah arose after eating in Shiloh and after drinking, and Eli the Cohen was sitting on the chair near the doorpost of the sanctuary of Hashem.
Okay, there he is. That's the first time we come across him, and he's sitting on the chair. Did any of us think, I didn't, Why are we being told he's sitting on a chair? Would it have been wrong if we'd have said Hannah rose after eating and drinking and Eli was in the temple of the Lord? Why do we need to, or even Eli was at the doorpost of the temple of the Lord? Why do we need to know that he was sitting on a chair? And the beautiful literary circle which is closed is we are introduced to Eli as sitting on the chair. What is this chair that he's sat on? Symbolically, what's the word kisei means chair, but it also means something else as well, doesn't it? If you're sitting on the kisei hakavod, that is the throne of glory. So a kisei is throne. I don't mean the throne in the little room. I mean the throne of the king. Okay, the king sits on a kisei. The word kisei means a chair, but it also means a throne. So what we see here is that Eli, what do we say? We use it even in English. We use that expression that the king was sitting on the throne for 20 years. The poor queen's been sat on her throne for 70 years, right? And so we use that expression in English as well. So Yoshev al Kisei, here this is telling us that Eli was the king. He wasn't the king because he didn't have kings yet, but he was effectively the king. He was the leader of the people, and he was sitting on the throne. And that's how we're introduced to Eli. Eli was the leader. He was Yoshev al Hakisei. And look, you could argue even further. He wasn't just Yoshev al Kisei. He was sat on a chair.
The chair.
He was Yoshev al Hakisei, the chair. It's called the Hey Hayadi'ah, the definite article. He was sat on the chair, i.e. the throne. He was sat on the throne. He was the leader. Let's go to chapter 4 and see the end of Eli, where we see the end of Eli is here in verse 18. Vayehi ki hazkiru et Aaron Elohim vayipol me'al hakisei. He fell from the chair. He didn't just fall backwards off his chair. We also say in English, don't we, that he fell from the throne. He fell from hakisei. Vayipol, where are we? Vayipol me'al hakisei. He fell from the throne. That's the end of his leadership. And look at the end of that verse. I don't know if any of you noticed. I certainly noticed this. He fell off the chair, he broke his neck, and because the man was old and weighty, and he judged Israel for 40 years. What's that got to do with the price of cheese? V'hu shofet et Yisrael 40 shana, because that's the end of his leadership. He fell off his chair. He was dethroned. And he was not only physically did he fall off his chair, metaphorically, he fell from Hakisei, the throne. And that is a fitting time for the Navi to tell us, V'hu shafat et Yisrael 40 shana. He judged Israel for 40 years. And that is the end of him. We don't hear anything more about Eli because Eli is now history. Yes, Leon.
Another example of bad translation by the art scroll, because it says he fell backwards off his chair. But it doesn't say that in the Ivrit.
No, it does not. It does not say Me'al Kiso from his chair. It says Me'al Hakisei, fell off the chair. Quite right. Well spotted, Leon. We'll put that in our book of bloopers when we send it to the editors. Very good. So yes, Vayipol Me'al Hakisei. So it's a beautiful literary circle is now closed. We begin in chapter 1. We're introduced to Eli as the leader, as somebody sitting on Hakisei, sitting on the chair. Which chair? The chair of leadership. And we see at the end here, he is unceremoniously dethroned. And he's dethroned, if I am right, he's dethroned because he got his priorities all wrong. He didn't educate his children in a way that he should have done, according to God. He was too religious in terms of religiosity, if I'm right, in terms of being more worried about the ark of God than he was about the people and his sons. And as a result of that, he fell off his chair backwards. Backwards. It was a backward step. And he died. And perhaps we're being told the man was old and weighty. Perhaps we're being told that as well, in the same way as we're told in other occasions when leaders are no longer able to lead, that sometimes you have to hand over to a younger man. That's what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu. Even though he didn't lose any of his strength, he had to hand over to Yoshua. We've had a whole discussion on many occasions that Moshe was not the man for the new generation. In modern day politics, it's happened over and over again. How often do we see that leaders, and I'm not speaking about today's vote in Parliament specifically, although you could apply it if you wanted to, how often do we see that leaders outstay their welcome and try and cling on to power when it's time to hand over? And this here was a handover which was forced upon Eli. He broke his neck and he died. So that was something that I think is there. I read that. I can't remember where I read it now. It might have been, I think it might have been in here. Rav Amnon Bazak, who is one of the rabbis from Gush Etzion, from Yeshivat Har Etzion in the Gush. He wrote an essay on this, and I think it was there that I read about that, although I couldn't be 100% sure, can't remember now. So let's just finish the chapter now. By
Johnny.
Yes, David.
Yeah, it was Rabbi Bazak. Just look at a couple of things. First of all, the criticism of Eli that you've built up this morning. You have support there from none other than the Ralbag. Can we look at the identity of the Benjaminite man that gives this news to Eli, and also at the Korean Ketiv in Pasuk Yud Gimel?
Okay, let's start with Yud Bet then. Verse 12, please, Leon.
A Benjamite man ran from the battlefront and came to Shiloh that day, his clothing ripped and dirt upon his head.
Okay, well, we're not told in the Pasuk who this Benjaminite was. David is going to give us a suggestion. David?
Okay, Rashi brings a medrash that says that this was Shaul, the future king, who had just fled from the battle. He'd ran a distance of 45 miles to get to Eli, and in the battle he managed to wrest the two tablets from the giant Goliath.
And then what did he do with them?
I brought them to Eli.
Okay. I hadn't read that Rashi or that Medrash. As you know, I like to learn things naki, clean. But let's just look at that critically. So the Benjaminite is Shaul, King Saul, or the future King Saul. And he wrested with a W the tablets out of the hand of the giant Goliath, and he brings them to Eli. Okay. In some ways, that actually increases the criticism of Eli, because if he's got the contents of the Ark of God, because Shaul had brought him the tablets of stone which were inside the ark of God. So what? He's got the main thing, and that actually adds even more power to my criticism of Eli, because if you think about the Aron HaBrit, if you think about the Ark of the Covenant, that's exactly what it is. It's the Aron. What is the word? What does Aron mean? It's a cupboard. Aron HaBrit. What's the Brit? The covenant. It's the cupboard where the covenant is kept. Now, what's important? The cupboard or the covenant? If you've got a safe, and inside your safe are your crown jewels, and somebody nicks the safe, and then somebody brings you back the crown jewels, you're not going to say to him, hang on a minute, where's my safe? You're going to say, thank you very much, that's wonderful, you've recovered the most important thing, which is the contents. So if that's the case, if we accept that midrash, that explanation of Rashi, then the criticism of Eli is even stronger. What's he so worried about the Ark of God for? He's got the Brit, he's got the contents of the Ark. And I would question, if I'm allowed to do that, I suppose I can do what I like, really. I would question this midrash, because what we're going to see in chapter 5 is that the Plishtim, the Philistines, suffer all sorts of unpleasantness. I won't go into details until next week, because I don't want to ruin your breakfasts. They suffer all sorts of unpleasantness as a result of having the Ark of God in their possession. Well, if the contents, which is the Brit, which is the most important thing, are no longer there, what's the big deal? So either I've missed the point about the Aron HaBrit, or Eli has missed the point about the contents of the Aron HaBrit.
Didn't you say there were two arks though, Johnny?
Yeah.
Two contents.
So
Two contents.
They took the main ark,
Yeah.
which they shouldn't have done, according to one opinion. And inside that ark would have been the unbroken luchot. The other ark, which is one they should have taken, the wooden ark that Moshe made, housed the broken luchot. The unbroken luchot were meant to stay in the Kodesh Kodashim. And it would seem that, according to this midrash quoted by Rashi, Shaul rescued the unbroken luchot and brought them back to Eli. So,
the unbroken ones. Oh.
If I was writing this, and that was the case, I would write, and a man of Benjamin ran from the battle array, came to Shiloh, blah, 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 and he gave this to Eli, and he gave him back the luchot, and Eli was extremely happy that he got the luchot back. We don't hear that at all. So, I don't know, I don't know that I'm... I don't know that I'm convinced that the psukim support that medrash, but thank you for bringing that.
Well,
Johnny, I think your point is very, very good. And if you go back, I just looked, the story of Hannah, this is this devout woman standing, not for just a minute, she's not staggering around looking like a drunk. Her lips were moving. Eli's looking at her, and apparently Eli had just been appointed on that day high priest and judge, and he's sitting on his throne near the Heichal, and he's looking at this woman not with compassion. Why presume it's true that apparently there's a discussion whether you allow, I think from there we learn that you're not supposed to raise your voice loud when you're davening, from Hannah.
Yeah.
But the idea that he came to the conclusion that she's drunk, in fact, is not Lomuvan Me'elav. It wasn't an obvious conclusion.
Yeah, I don't know if you were with us, but right at the beginning of chapter 1, when this occurred, we discussed that in quite some detail in the shiur, and we also we were critical of Eli, but then we were but then afterwards, if you recall, everyone, we said that Eli actually redeemed himself because he immediately accepted that he'd done wrong. And that was the point, that the greatness of Eli was that he was able to and actually I was talking about this yesterday in the shiur between Mincha and Mariv. A person who's able to say, you know what, you're right. I wasn't quite right there. I was too hasty in my reaction there.
Yeah, he blessed her.
And
Yeah.
that's what Eli does. And it would have been very easy for Eli to say, shut up, woman, get out of here. Don't give me any lip. I'm the Kohen Gadol here. I'm the shofet. Get lost. And he doesn't.
Yeah.
He says,
Come on.
you know what? You were right and I was wrong. And your prayers should be answered. And he prays for her. And that's the greatness of Eli. Everybody makes mistakes. Even the Kohen Gadol makes mistakes. The greatness of a person is to be able to retract from a mistake and not be too big to say, you know what, I was wrong and you were right. I apologize. We went into that in some detail, including if anybody who wants to look at it can go back and look at the recordings. We talked about all the halachot that we learned from Hannah. We went through all the halachot from the Gemara that we learned from the Tefillah of Hannah in some detail. Those of you who want to re-look at that, it's all on the recording. There was a second thing you mentioned there, David, which was, what was it?
The Korean Ketiv in Pasuk Yud Gimel.
Okay, so let me remind everybody what a Korean Ketiv is. A Korean Ketiv is, and we're going to see an absolute belter in the next chapter. A Korean Ketiv is where it's written in one way and it's read in another way. We went through this in some detail a few weeks ago as well. I can't remember whether it was in this shiur or whether it was in the Gemara shiur, but we went into some detail about the Korean Ketiv, how it's written and how it's read. But here we have it's read as Yad Al Kisei Yad Derech Mutzapeh, and it's written Yach, is it?
Yeah.
Yach Derech Mutzapeh. Yach. Okay, David, enlighten us, please.
So Yach means smitten. So it instead of talking about the location that he's sitting next to the road, he's sitting there smitten by the road. And again, supporting your theory, he's smitten not at the loss of life, but at the loss of the Aaron and the contents.
Right. Okay. So that's again support for our view.
That's
and again, in some ways, David, that also supports my skepticism, if you like, about the Midrash, because if that's the case, and he was smitten and we know he was worried about it, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. Yeah. Libo charad al Aron Elohim. And the man then comes with the luchot. This man, Shaul, comes with the luchot. Why doesn't his heart stop trembling? Which we don't see.
And it's possible there because this Krieg Ketiv is brought by Radak, who rejects Rashi's bringing the Midrash.
Okay, so the Radak doesn't accept the Rashi's Midrash. Okay, that would fit. And presumably he doesn't accept it because it doesn't make sense that he would still be trembling if he's got the tablets of stone, the luchot, back. Okay, very interesting. Let's just finish the chapter. We've got a couple of minutes left. Let's read verses 19 to 22 and just have a look carefully again at the order that the psukim speak about, and let's just have a quick comparison between the order here we're going to see in verse 19 and the previous verses. Leon.
His daughter-in-law, the wife of Pinchas, was soon to give birth. And when she heard the news about the capture of the ark of God and that her father-in-law died and her husband, she crouched down and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. As she was about to die, those standing around her spoke to her. "Fear not, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, and she did not take it to her heart. She called the boy Ichabod, saying, "Glory has been exiled from Israel," because of the capture of the ark of God and because of the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, "Glory has been exiled from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured."
Now, we've got some interesting differences here, haven't we? Look at the order that we had before. Before, we had Israel fled, slaughter of the people, the death of the sons of Eli, and then the ark of God. And I wanted to say that that was building up to the worst possible news, the ark of God. Now, this order seems to be the other way around. The ark of God is mentioned first, then the death of Eli, and finally the death of her husband. Now, if I'm right that we're building up to the worst news, then I think that fits in for the wife of Pinchas, because for her personally, what's the worst thing that can happen to her is that her husband has been killed. A woman who's just about to give birth, just about the worst thing you can tell her is that her husband's dead. And then the next worst thing is her father-in-law, because he was the leader of the people and presumably the leader of the family, and then the ark of God. I'm not suggesting that the ark of God didn't bother her, but that, if I'm right that we build up to the worst thing, then it still fits with the daughter-in-law of Pinchas, daughter-in-law of Eli, Pinchas's wife. But then, and then she herself says, verse 21, she calls the child Ichavod, which means without glory. So Efshar, what does Efshar mean?
Impossible.
Impossible. And Efshar?
Possible.
So means not, okay? So Ikavod, which is what this kid was called, means the lack of glory. Glory is gone. But why does she call it? She says the Aaron was taken, her father-in-law died, and her husband died, in that order. Now, I would say she's again built up to the worst possible scenario for her. But actually, in this pasuk, the next pasuk shows me that maybe, in her case anyway, maybe Michael was right all along. And you actually say the worst first, because look what she finally says. What's her last words on this earth? Verse 22, Leon.
"Glory has been exiled from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured."
So she only finally mentions the ark of God. She has acknowledged the death of her father-in-law and her husband as being, in some ways, for her at least, personally worse than the ark of God. But I'm going to try and redeem my position against Michael's position by saying that when she says the glory has been exiled from Israel, she's making a national statement as opposed to a personal statement. She has not fallen into Eli, the trap that Eli fell into, which is of personally holding religiosity in a higher level than the personal. For her, the biggest disaster was the death of her husband. The next biggest disaster was the death of her father-in-law. And the next biggest disaster was the Ark of God. But she recognizes that on a national level, glory has been exiled from Israel. Gala kvod mi Yisrael, for the Ark of God has been taken. So I think, like all good machlakot, we can say that we're both right. Michael was right in the first place, that at the end of the day, the worst possible thing for Israel as a nation was that the Ark of God was destroyed, was taken. But on a personal level, there's a problem when you override personal considerations for the sake of things, religiosity and religious symbols. So that brings us to the end, really, of a section of history, because we no longer hear anything about Eli or Chofni and Pinchas. They've all been killed one way or another. The prophecy of God has been fulfilled, that the house of Eli will be destroyed and that they will die on the same day. And we finish this idea having found that lovely closing of the circle in a literary manner, that Eli fell off his chair and was dethroned. And we end this chapter, and we ended this chapter in history with a statement noting this statement is of a woman, okay, who says, a woman who has her priorities right, and then who says, as she is expiring this life, God has been exiled from Israel, for the Ark of God has been taken. And we are then at a nadir in Jewish history, and then we'll be ready to see the next chapter in the story and the next chapter in Jewish history, which is really the main part of the book of Shmuel. This has just been the introduction to the Shmuel, and that is, of course, the life and the times of Shmuel Hanavi himself. And that's where we will go to next in the next chapter. Yes,
you've been present, I presume, unfortunately, when people have passed away and they've said goodbye, surrounded by the family, they say goodbye to the family. Then they say Shema Yisrael. It's the last things they say.
Yes, that's a very good point. Shema Yisrael is a...
I believe, I don't know, I haven't been present.
It is indeed the way it's meant to be, that the last words that one says is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Hashem Hu Elohim. That is, if you look in the Siddur at the final vidui, the final confession, those are the last two things that one says. One recognizes the dominion of God, Hashem Hu Elohim, Shema Yisrael. You're quite right. And I think that this is a, if you were making a play out of the first 4 chapters of this book, it would be a dramatic end here. And this would be where the curtain fell at this particular moment. And people would leave the performance with a feeling of real emotion at this point, before we go on to the next chapter in the history of the Jewish people, which is the story of the life of and times of Shmuel.
Tell Howard to work on it.
Yes, where is Howard? We're missing him.
Don't know.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Thank you very much, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny.
Okay, in that case, I wish you Shavua Tov. Those of you who are going on the Tiul tomorrow, please don't be late. I still have a couple of spaces left for anybody who wants to join and has not yet let me know. We're actually going to, tomorrow, we're actually going to the burial place of Shmuel Hanavi, and we will have a little bit of a Tanakh lesson there on site. That's what is called a Tanakh Tiul. We will learn some Tanakh actually on site at the burial place of Shmuel, as well as other things tomorrow. Tuesday night will be the first in a series of 3 shiurim on Shemitah at 8:30. There will be a handout which I'm almost finished making now. I'll send that out, or Avril will, before the shiur on Tuesday night. And then following that on Monday, next Monday, so a week tomorrow, is Howard's Play, the trial of David Ben-Gurion. So lots of exciting things. Don't forget all the things that I would like you to volunteer for. I shall be bracing myself for the flood of emails volunteering very shortly. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Good, Jonathan.
Good job, thank you.